The New York Football Giants continue their push towards the Week 1 tilt against the Tennessee Titans. We dive in on injury updates for Kayvon Thibodeaux, Azeez Ojulari, and the contract restructure for one Darius Slayton, what it means for this season, himself, Sterling Shepard, and beyond for Big Blue. Next. Yes, friends, it is OGP, the One Giant podcast, coming to you live on YouTube on a Thursday morning. One more day to go in the week before the Giants will pack up and head down to Tennessee and finally kick off this brand new season, looking to have some better fortunes than they did last year, looking to prove some things if you're Daniel Jones, looking to prove some things if you're Brian Daboll and you are Mike Kafka and you are even Wink Martindale. Let's think about that for a minute here. We're going to talk about the injury updates on the defensive side of the ball, and then kind of an interesting angle that I started to massage myself into after the New York Football Giants restructured Darius Slayton to keep him on the roster and relieve a little bit more cap room. But think about all the layers coming into this game. At the highest level, Joe Shane, listen, that's more of a season-long evaluation, 1, 2, or even 3 season-long evaluation for a general manager, because you're coming in with things that you need to figure out, right? Problems you need to solve, players you need to move on from, and ultimately a roster that you need to construct for yourself. But then there is the head coaching level, the coordinators, and all the way down to the players. But I find this really fascinating, as we'll welcome in here in a second. We see him. He's backstage. He's ready to gear up. We'll give him a 5 count before we bring in Andrew Makowitz and get him into the conversation. Oh, look, we got a thumbs up, ladies and gentlemen. Dive right in. Andy says, I need no pause. As we welcome in, by the way, myself, Adam Arbrecht, and I do break down the Locked On Nets podcast covering the Brooklyn Nets. And over there would be the healthy, wealthy, and wise seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. Things get thrown off when we don't have perfect rhythm and cadence out the gate.
I know. Listen, dog walking takes a little bit longer. All of a sudden, everything gets thrown off. I'm coming in late. You're recapping everything for the listeners. But I am here. And you know what else is here? Football is here, Adam.
And by the way, yeah, it's a fact. By the way, guys, I don't let dog walking take precedent over the show. It's not just because I don't have a dog. There's a lot of conviction and commitment that I have to the podcast. We say good morning to Marty, by the way, our frequent flyer on the live stream over on YouTube. Not to break our flow, I was just saying the things that are on the line here and taking a look just very briefly at Brian Daboll, first-year head coach. A lot to prove as far as what he's capable of, and now being the runner of the ship, right? Overseeing all of the facets of being a head coach in the NFL. Mike Kafka, we talked about it a little bit the other day, getting out from underneath Andy Reid, right? The opportunity to say, I can run an offensive system. I am a guy that over the next 2 seasons, you want to start to give a little bit of buzz around head coaching opportunities. And then Wink Martindale. Here's a guy who's been known, has his methods, has one essentially bad year predicated on injuries in the secondary for the Baltimore Ravens, and they go, yeah, I think we're all right. We can go ahead and move on from you. He's the aging veteran coach on this staff who's trying to say, no. Yeah, I suffered some injuries a year ago. That is not what my defense and what my scheme is, and my ability to be versatile and evolving in an ever-changing NFL landscape. Like, there's a lot of storylines going into this weekend just from a coaching staff standpoint.
Well, it's a good thing that there's no injuries to the defense for Wink Martindale this year, right?
Like, right. We're going to talk about those in a second too.
That's a very good thing. But to your point, it's not only about them. You talk about Mike Kafka. He was the quarterback coach for Patrick Mahomes. He's considered a young, innovative mind in the game. People consider him very well respected. Was kind of stuck behind Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy tried to go for 5 or 6 different head coaching jobs and kept getting turned down. It was going to be the natural progression for Mike Kafka to be the Kansas City Chief offensive coordinator. But instead, he's like, I got to go somewhere else to make it happen. We're glad it's in New York. Obviously he brings an interesting young dynamic to this. It does feel like we have a lot of youth balanced with the experience of Wink Martindale on the defensive side. And
Yes.
then also you have this younger GM in Joe Shane, who I know we don't, once the season starts, we're not really going to talk about Dave Gettleman. But if you had to say, like, what is the polar opposite of Dave Gettleman, someone like Joe Shane kind of comes to my mind, like a younger, innovative guy that doesn't kick the can down the road, doesn't talk in hog molly and gold jacket speak, and actually just says very like neutral things because he has a business to run, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I was saying at the top too that the GM is the one that you evaluate over 2 seasons, 3 seasons, etc. But the coaching staff is, and to your point, there's going to be players that are up and down, injuries and otherwise. The personnel isn't perfect. It doesn't matter. Head coaches, coaching staffs, you get graded starting week 1, starting against the Tennessee Titans. And to your point, we have 2 things that I mentioned at the top I want to get into. First is the injury updates. Nobody's going to be excited to hear this as we also welcome in Mr. Chambers. Good to see you in the live feed as well. Happy to do the morning, man. The morning shift is what I like to be a part of for OGP. Kayvon Thibodeaux, along with tragically Azeez Ojulari. Art Stapleton put this out. With the calf for Azeez Ojulari, the knee for Thibodeaux, again focusing on their hands and footwork without contact during media viewing period, looking more and more likely week 2 at the earliest for their return. If we're talking about Wink Martindale wanting to get off on a good foot, and if we know that the secondary is certainly going to be a point of emphasis and focus for a lot of opposition this year, man, does it hurt to take away your top and first round star of the new regime in Kayvon Thibodeaux. And also, by the way, the guy that just set the rookie franchise record for sacks last year in Azeez Ojulari. Those are your 2 guys, maybe the 2 most important components if you want to throw into that mix of Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, we know, right? But that defensive front, the pressure for Wink Martindale, he will be without 2 of the best pieces.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
Potentially. Still a glimmer here.
Yes.
Still a glimmer.
So both were limited, and most media reports are saying that it's ambitious to think that either Azeez or Kayvon will play.
We're an ambitious team.
Right. Well, ambitious players too. I mean, you hear Kayvon Thibodeaux, he's like, I want to be out there as soon as possible. They ask him why he didn't take the card out. Like he's like, I'm not that guy. I got to show that I can make it happen. He feels like a guy that's going to push.
I can't sprain this knee further. I can't mess this knee up further if I don't start walking on it. Right?
Well, he basically is going to push and make the training staff make a tough call. Like he's not going to pull himself out. You know that. So you have to kind of protect the player. It is tough because Wink's system is predicated on pressure. Having your 2 guys that are most likely to be able to get to the quarterback is a huge loss. But remember, when we talk about the Tennessee Titans, they lost their leading sack rusher last week. Harold Landry is not going to be out there. Yeah. He had 12.5 sacks. This happens. Injuries happen. So it's not like it just happens to the Giants, and the Giants need to adjust accordingly.
Yeah, listen, whether it's we talked about maybe Quincy Roche would be elevated from the practice squad to start the season. He gets through the waiver wires and gets back onto the 16-man. You have Oshane Ximenez. You're going to maybe hear a little bit about players like Cam Brown getting some reps there. We talk about inside, outside, regardless, Carter Coughlin, right? All these guys are going to be in the mix. And then you think about maybe the versatility or just switching it up. We've said this all kind of off season here about, we understand that Wink Martindale's system, this reminds me of Steve Spagnuolo, right? He brings the heat. He's going to bring the pressure. And guess what, though? If Steve Spagnuolo didn't have the ability to adapt his system a little bit, he wouldn't have survived going from the Giants, having a head coaching opportunity, coming back to Big Blue, then getting out to Kansas City, and being able to be a productive coordinator in this league. You have to find a way to be adaptable. We said this the other day. Again, I think 4-man fronts, switching into a 4-3 would make a lot more sense here in a situation like this week 1 when you have a little bit thin depth. But it's just good. Listen, you got to manufacture pressure either way, right? You can switch up what your initial point of attack is going to be or what your season long plans are, but you're still going to have to find a way to bring dynamic looks. I expect safeties to be involved in this. I expect Tay Crowder to be an interesting one to keep an eye on here, right? You have to use every ounce of athleticism to get some of that speed and to try to get Tennessee off their rhythm.
It's funny because we're so excited to get football started, but when you
Yes.
see the
Sorry.
limited participants, Adam, in Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeaux, and even as you mentioned, the safety position, Dane Belton out there in the red non-contact jersey, it doesn't feel like those three guys are like maybe a couple more days away from being able to play week one. Like I think a realistic option for all three of those players is to be on the field for the home opener for the Giants
Yeah.
in week two. It just feels like, man, if the first regular season game was a couple of days later, they would all have a really good shot to be able to play. I think the one important thing on the safety side of things is if Dane Belton cannot play, there are only three healthy, active safeties on the roster right now in Julian Love, Xavier McKinney, and Jason Pinnock. Now, you saw Tony Jefferson out there getting some reps, getting some practice. If Dane Belton can't go, you fully expect Tony Jefferson to get promoted to the active roster, right?
I would assume so. Yeah, you got to look probably on the offensive side and say how few offensive linemen can we afford to carry going into week one, right? You already have Bredesen going to be playing there at left guard, so you have to try to think about safeguarding against potential injuries. But who are my three most versatile backup offensive linemen, so I can carry 8 instead of 9 or 10 on the active roster? That can give you the flexibility to bring up an extra safety. It can. You mentioned Pinnock. He's going to be safety. I think a little bit of coverage work for him as well. So the more open bodies we can create on the defensive side this week, I think that's going to be the agenda as they shuffle it going into Sunday.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, they're going to have to shift and get creative on the defensive side of the ball because, as other people have mentioned, especially Marty in the comments, stopping Derrick Henry is priority number one in this. We want to get
Yeah.
pass rush so that we can take advantage of the times we stop Derrick Henry. It's not going to be the converse. It's not we're going to get all this pressure, we're going to get sacks, and then that'll lead to stopping Derrick Henry. It's the other way around.
Right.
And so we've already talked about the need up front to have some big bodies in there, like DJ Davidson is probably going to play a role, some of the larger defensive linemen at the front. And it's why Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams are so important in this matchup against the Titans.
Yeah, and we broke this down, right? We did our offense versus defense, our defense versus offense. We had Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans come on and really break down some things from an X's and O's. Go check him out pre and post game for this one. As he said, he'll be looking at the Titans, but a byproduct of that is going to be the Giants and what pressures did they bring and how did it look? So a good postseason thing. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk about a little bit of fantasy football, some betting opportunities, some places we can make some money, and then also get into really our game predictions around this one. What are expectations for some of the key players in this? How do we expect Daniel Jones to show up in game number one in what is, it seems like a year by year, the most critical season of his NFL career? One last footnote quote here before I actually want to bring up a conversation that you were not privy to start the show, Andy. But I'll tell you what, you get up every morning and you see that skyline over there and you know you're in the greatest city in the world and the greatest place to work at. I'm just fired up to actually get into some real games. That's Wink Martindale, baby. This guy is not concerned. Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeaux, give me a bag of balls. I'm going to go out there and try to get this thing done. I always love Wink Martindale's general personality and attitude. Now, the other footnote here that came out somewhere in the wash while we were doing episodes yesterday and having great crossover content and all that good stuff was one Darius Slayton restructured his contract. He went down to a veteran minimum salary, cleared $1.6 million on the cap for the New York Football Giants. And there's some things, like I was noticing an article online from the New York Post that came out from Paul Schwartz, and he framed it as pay cut gives Darius Slayton last chance to salvage Giants' career. Now, the Giants' career part is certainly, you could say that's a big component of it. However, I feel like it's like salvage career. And I don't think that that's the case. It's, the Giants are in a certain situation and you need to kind of bend into that will. Now, he was already listed, Darius Slayton, as being the last wide receiver on the depth chart in the wide receiver room. So he's as far down as you can go. What were just your general thoughts around the restructure? Because I had, this is a little bit global, a season perspective here involving him. And as I said at the top, one Sterling Shepard. And I came to something, my friend, late last night while you were asleep. the wheels were turning, and I came up with something very fascinating.
All right, so I can go a couple different ways with this, Adam. I have the idea of what it means for the Giants, what it means for the product on the field, and what it means for Darius Slayton. So pick your own adventure. Which way would you like to go with this?
What does it mean for Darius Slayton? Because I think that's the most interesting. Everything else with everyone else on the roster, we kind of see that hierarchy developing.
Well, yeah, let's start with this. So it does bleed into some of the other discussion points, but this was really the only option that Darius Slayton had at this moment in time, right? Because Joe Shane waited so long to do this restructure, there wasn't an opportunity for Darius Slayton to really make his name anywhere else. Like if he says no, I want an outright release, his opportunity elsewhere, I'm sure that they checked with other teams, gave a little bit of a pulse check. Is he going to make much more than the veteran minimum this late in the game, not knowing the playbook with depth charts established? It would have been, he may have gotten a couple $100,000 more from another team, but he would have been buried on the depth chart for weeks and weeks and weeks. And like, why would you do that when you know the Giants right now have very, very tentative at best wide receiver health and like options in front of him? Like, who knows what's going to happen with Kenny Golladay? Are we sure Sterling Shepard's going to stay healthy? Kadarius Toney in his entire career has not been able to stay on the field. And you look at Wan'Dale Robinson, he's kind of an unknown. When you think about the wide receiver room in general, where else does Darius Slayton have a chance to know the playbook and maybe have an opportunity to get playing time faster than we think?
Brief pause in the conversation. Yeah, Marty, maybe I do. Maybe I do need a cup of coffee. All right. It's been a heck of a week. I got a lot going on. I have a busy work plate. It's not just one Giants podcast, which I love and I'm dedicated to. A lot of things going on, Marty. How dare you?
Feels like Marty knows that you ran out of Cafe Busto or something. You know what I mean?
Well, we all know, and you can tell from my background, I'm not in the home estate right now. So we're struggling. We're on the fly. Fax me a coffee, Marty, if you can. I think that you're right. The funny thing is, or not funny, the interesting thing is, if Joe Shane was going to any player and having these conversations like with Blake Martinez and saying, listen, you're making $2.5 million. What do you want the options to look like? You want us to try to hold out and see if we can find a trade partner for you and maintain that salary? You could probably drop your salary down and we could trade you much quicker and maybe put you on a team with a better opportunity to showcase what you are and maybe get yourself a better contract next offseason, right? So I think it's interesting to think about where was the landscape of the NFL and the interest level potentially in any way in Darius Slayton. Because if you're the Giants, this is the best of all worlds for Big Blue. You keep a guy that has flashed, and we've talked about before what he did his rookie year, that he can be that player that can take the top off of a defense. Now we get him at a veteran minimum for a year. If he walks away into the sunset, we're a new regime, a new GM, a new coaching staff. That's okay. But we still get to maximize what that value is. And maybe over a small sample size to start this year, hey, if you get into a game for 15 reps and you get a couple of targets and you catch one big ball, that can be enough to tell another team he may be worth going to get. And now it's a much more friendlier number to bring him over at. And the Giants could say, listen, for a 7th round pick, we'll take it. We'll take whatever we can get for this guy. I think that this works out first for the Giants to safeguard against what's going on. A little bit for Darius Slayton when you talk about the health concerns. But then I get fascinated because you mentioned Sterling Shepard here. You can hop in. But I had a fascinating wrinkle when we talked about trade partners for Darius Slayton earlier in this offseason and what I think could unfold heading towards the dedeadline.
Yeah, I know that I can see the wheels turning about where this could mean other things.
Not just coffee I'm thinking about.
Yeah, seriously. Well, I want to focus on the other piece, which is the Joe Shane piece.
All right.
And people might say, why so late in the game? Like, why is this happening right now? And I think what we're understanding about Joe Shane's methodology is he is a patient general manager. He will wait and explore every single option. He will also wait until when he makes that ask, the Giants are in the best position to have the ask granted to them. Like if he went to Darius Slayton earlier in the offseason and said, I want you to take a pay cut, Darius Slayton would have probably said, release me, I'll latch on with another team. I'll have an opportunity throughout training camp to be able to become a wide receiver number 3 or 4 for another team. Mm-hmm. But because Joe Shane waited, it flipped who had kind of the leverage in this whole entire discussion. And the Giants end up keeping the player that is familiar with the playbook, that has played well for them in the past, and they saved the $1.6 million. So you got to give a tip of the cap to Joe Shane by taking his time and being super patient with this discussion, he ended up saving the money and getting the guy that the Giants wanted.
That was a pun there, Andy. Tip of the cap. You see what happened? You see what you did there?
No, I don't even.
Tip of the cap. Cap.
Yes. I mean,
see, Marty, I don't need coffee to be with it. The bottom line, I think you're right about that, though. This is what Joe Schoen has been pretty transparent around what the agenda is. Has it been perfect as far as the way he would have scripted it? Maybe not, but the process is there, and he keeps having this eye on what we're trying to accomplish, big picture here. He has not made, as you mentioned at the top, former GM for the New York Football Giants. There's no misgivings with Joe Schoen. He's not going to tell you how he's going to go about it, when.
It looks like Adam just popped off for a second. But yeah, I think what he was talking about is it's completely different than what Dave Gettleman was doing previously, right? Adam, what you were just saying, it's a completely different situation than what Joe Schoen was doing, what Dave Gettleman was doing before.
Yeah, not only just from a philosophical standpoint and trying to fix the franchise, but just from the standpoint of when you communicate about this stuff to the media, right? What is your plan? It's to improve this team. It's to clean up the cap. It's to try to build a roster that's sustainable and can win going forward. And all of these things seem to point towards that. Here's the interesting thing that I want to bring up with you. Sterling Shepard is also on this roster. He's progressing towards playing week 1. He is also a wide receiver that's injury concerns. I want to make something very clear. I like that the Giants kept Darius Slayton. Like, I like keeping him around even just for this year. I think that he still has some potential there. And you'd like to think if players can get a bump underneath these new coaches, Slayton could be one of them. It is concerning that he's only fallen down the depth chart over the course of the offseason. He hasn't seemed to really fit into it. But Sterling Shepard comes into this year, and when you think about this depth chart and you say, well, it's it's Kenny Golladay for better or worse on one side. It's going to be Kadarius Toney on the other, though very versatile and moving. And Wan'Dale Robinson is set in as the starter in the slot. Sterling Shepard, we know he's capable of being a starter in this league, but he's going to kind of be, right now they say maybe behind on the outside with Kadarius Toney. David Sills is in the mix there. Richie James is in the mix there. I think that only one of these two wide receivers is on this roster after the trade deadline this year. Before I explain where and why, do you agree that one way or the other, Sterling Shepard or Darius Slayton, one of them will be gone by the deadline?
I don't necessarily agree with you. I understand where your logic and reasoning is, because here's the thing. The other world is if the Giants are a competitive team and they are playing well and they look like they have an opportunity to play over their potential or over what is projected of them, there may be an opportunity for both to stay on the roster. That's one. And the second one is, the other thing is, like, if one of them has an injury that's lingering and they kind of have, like, they aren't, tradable asset at that moment, it may cause the Giants to say that we have to hold on to him because the interest from other teams may not be there. But I have a feeling I understand where you're going in this.
Well, let me tell it plain, right? Darius Slayton is the harder sell here. Even though Sterling Shepard has had injuries, Sterling Shepard is an established high-level elite number 2, at times played a number 1 role for the Giants and could do it successfully, but is obviously 30 years old with the injury concerns. I believe we talked about previously in the offseason what would be a nice trade spot for Darius Slayton, place where you could take the top off of a good quarterback. Do you remember where we said?
I mean, I thought Green Bay could be one of them.
Green Bay, you are correct, sir. But pull that back a second. If you are the Green Bay Packers and you're progressing 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season, isn't Sterling Shepard the exact thing that you would want to add to that group? Look at the way that Aaron Rodgers has talked about the wide receiver core all offseason. Young guys got to step up. Young guys got to get on the game script. Young guys got to improve. I like the veteran talent. I like where they're at. They're doing what's necessary. And then when you look at that veteran talent, it's not all guys that are, 26, 27. Some of them are a little bit older, like a Randall Cobb, one of his favorites. Don't forget that Sterling Shepard, the start of last season, had every bit of the speed and burst in the shiftiness in and out of his routes as any point in his career. If he comes back and looks healthy, I think that the Green Bay Packers are the perfect team to be saying, hey, we're successful. We know that we can win games in the regular season, but here's an opportunity to take away a potential player that other teams may be targeting and add to a group that arguably is the most open, the most concerning, and the most question mark laden that it's been in years for Green Bay after losing Devontae Adams. Like, I think so much of this, if Sterling Shepard can be on the field and show that he's healthy again, would point to, man, what an opportunity to send a late mid-round pick to the Giants to get back an experienced wide receiver. I mean, just picture that, man. You're not going to tell me that you can't see Sterling Shepard just falling into that system and being an absolute weapon for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, but you know what, Adam? I'm not a
I
Green
sit
Bay
back
Packer
in my chair
fan.
and I relax.
I'm not a Green Bay Packer fan. I'm a Giant fan. I don't want Sterling Shepard to go anywhere.
Let
Like,
me
I
be
know
really
you
clear.
mentioned,
I love Sterling Shepard, and I want Sterling Shepard to get an extension from the New York Football Giants. I want him to be. My preference would be. I paint the picture, and then I bring you back into home base, everybody, where I tell you I want Sterling Shepard to retire a New York Football Giant. I want him to be able to be healthy and to have a little bit of a reduced role for the New York Football Giants and still be able to be successful and teach and help Wan'Dale Robinson to grow. And when you hopefully jettison Kenny Galladay's money next off season, you get a chance to have Sterling Shepard be a part of a young, dynamic, growing group and be that veteran stalwart that he's already been, right? The longest tenured Giant on the New York Giants. I don't want him to go anywhere, but if the footprints of Joe Schoen on the beach are telling you where he's headed, it's that when opportunity knocks for veteran talent, he's going to answer that call and try to make the best move for the team going forward.
yeah, I think it's going to be twofold with Sterling Shepard. The first piece of it is, how does he look? We've just seen him cut in practice, but he's coming off a gruesome Achilles injury, right? Like, is he going to have that burst, that shiftiness that Sterling Shepard has had in the past? We're going to have to see that early on in the season so that we know that he's valuable in this whole thing. And the second piece of it is just, how are the Giants looking? How are they progressing? And what is Joe Schoen's opinion of Sterling Shepard? Because we know James Bradbury wasn't part of the long term because of cap casualty. We know Blake Martinez took a pay cut and still wasn't able to hang on to this roster by week 1. So there was
Julian Love has ingratiated himself and looks like he's going to be a component of this team.
Right. And like the players like Julian Love, so he looks like he's going to be sticking around.
Right?
Yes. Leonard Williams gets a restructure that essentially guarantees he will be here next season. So we really don't have an indication exactly of what Joe Schoen, Kafka, and Daboll think of Sterling Shepard. Obviously, he's a critical piece of this because he's been around for a while. But really understanding where their head is at on what they think he can contribute is going to be a huge factor this season.
Of course. And so I just thought it was interesting, a fun little tip there. Most people in the conversation are saying I prefer Shep over Slayton. We all get that. I don't have any love lost for Slayton. It's Sterling Shepard. It's Sterling Shepard. He feels like the embodiment of what you want a New York Football Giant to be. He's always done it the right way. All of those superlatives that we talk about. And while some people like Chambers are saying it depends on how that wide receiver core looks out there in Green Bay, don't forget Christian Watson, one of the prospects that we talked about leading up to the draft. He is out there. He had some injuries. He's trying to get himself back. So there's a lot of mystery out there. Is there anything else, Andrea, if I could, that you wanted to touch on here on a Thursday? This was just news and notes. Listen, for the most part, injuries don't look like they're going up. If you're injured on the Giants, you're probably not going to play. That's the general sentiment. And then we're coming tomorrow, obviously, talk more predictions where we think certain players are going to go from a performance standpoint and give our bold scoreline.
The last thing I was going to say, and Adam, you and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. Don't want to rehash it, but it's good as a footnote. You see the Giants having to get Darius Slayton a pay cut. We needed the $1.6 million. You see
little haircut.
Yeah, we see them restructuring Leonard Williams and being able to free up $12 million in cap space. You see the tough decisions on Blake Martinez and James Bradbury and Logan Ryan and not re-signing Evan Ingram and all the different things the Giants had to do. And it just made me wonder, like, these were impossible decisions for Joe Schoen to make, to be able to have a competent roster and to clean things up and to make sure that we were healthy, from a cap perspective moving forward. Like, I messaged you, and it's just off to the side. It's like, if we were to have stuck with the old regime, what was the plan going to be? Like, think about how many veterans had to leave that were Dave Gettleman guys and Joe Judge guys that, like, we just needed $1 million or $2 million here or there, and they just had to go. Like, what was the plan going to be? Because Joe Schoen has made so many hard calls here and had to get rid of so many veterans. And, like, he's trying to work with, like, nickels and dimes, didn't make any free agent splashes at all. Like, the only multi-year deal he did in free agent, well, Tyrod Taylor as a backup quarterback and the right guard making $7 million was the only moves he could make. So my question to you is more like, what was the plan going to be if the previous regime was still here in this cap mess?
Yeah, and this is where, you'd say Giants fans would point to, 4-win team last year. Yeah, but all the injuries and everybody goes down. If Daniel Jones is healthy, XYZ, then maybe they were a 7-win team last season, right? Who knows what they could have been capable of if everyone's healthy. Okay, a 7-win team, maybe an 8-win team. That could be feeling a little bit bold. That isn't where you're supposed to be when you're spending the amount of money that Gettleman was spending, but it would have been. You can always find money. The money can be found. You would have kept it together. You would have tried to keep it together as much as possible. Now, whether or not James Bradberry would have been moved on from after this season, feels like Leonard Williams be brought back, but you have Dexter Lawrence. That's the draft pick from that regime. So maybe Leonard Williams moves on. You're going to shuffle the deck on the offensive line. You're going to look at Saquon Barkley. That would be fascinating because that's drafted by Gettleman, right? Second overall. So you have to bring him back on a deal. But you can always find a way to manipulate money and keep it together. You do that when the team is winning, and the idea is we have our rookie quarterback, and we're going to win on his rookie contract. So what I think would have happened, they would have kept the band together for one more year, thinking we're going to make the playoffs or something's going to happen here, and then assessed it another year from now where dead cap money being shifted around. They actually would have still come back out of it and had some cap room and flexibility to work with. The problem is, the product on the field never met what the architecture looked like, right? We're building a tower to the gods. And then it turns out it was a 3-story, Section 8 in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And you go, guys, I can't quite reach it. And that's why you're in this strip it down mode here. When you don't realize what you need to do, you actually can pound how much harder it's going to be to do it when the time comes.
Right. And the simple answer to that is they would have restructured James Bradberry instead of outright releasing him. And they would have, we have 60 million in cap space next season. They would have ate into that restructuring, guys.
Kenny Golladay, they would have done it with him too. Everyone that we go, oh God, do you want this guy on the roster? They would have said, we'll give it to you longer and more.
Right. And they would have done that. And they basically, and to your point, that's what winning teams do that are winning 12 games. They're like, let's just keep this going. How long can we keep this going for? But like by robbing yourself of the cap space next season, you're basically saying like, we're projected to be a 7-win team this year. We're going to have no cap space next year. And all the players you just restructured are a year older. Like, where is the final line? So I just think it's glad to be able to make that change to Joe Schoen, who's like, I'm going to put a stop to this because I'm not looking for my job this season. Let's try to win 7 games, then have cap space and improve on 7 wins by going out and getting a handful of players.
Yeah, and that's why at the end of the day, last year, you can talk about it however you want. I get it from a Giants fan perspective. I am a Giants fan. I get wanting to say sorry, guys. There's not 4 or 5 wins mysteriously hiding inside of injuries. Everybody has injuries. So you can never justify what could have happened when you have 4 wins on the docket. You want to give it 6? You want to give it 7? You're supposed to be winning 10 or 11 or 12 to keep the band together. We'll come back in tomorrow. Like I said, we have betting lines to talk about. I think the Giants are like a 6 to 7 point underdog right now. Could have gotten in on that line at closer to like 4, I think. Would have been a little more favorable depending on where you were sitting and if you want to take the Giants on the money line, the spread, all that good stuff. Fantasy previews, talking about that. We've got a little draft that we're going to be taking care of in the background as well. And we have a new partnership coming up that's going to be really exciting to tap into some really cool options. We're actually going to try to do. Andy's known for this. We're trying to give you guys some really smart plays and an opportunity to make a little bit of cheddar on a Friday. And then we'll also, of course, what's Daniel Jones going to do? What's Barkley going to do? Who's going to step on the wide receivers? How is the defense going to play? Will the Giants win this game? That's all coming up on Friday's show. Andy, add into it, please.
One last thing, and Marty said it in the comments. Football is back. Football is back tonight. Rams versus Bills in LA. Super Bowl champion. Yes. Adam, at the end of the day, give me your very quick prediction. Who wins the first game of the NFL season?
Sean McVay and the Rams, in his tenure as head coach, has never had a losing record at any point of his 6-season tenure. Were he to lose tonight, it would be the first time that he's had a losing record. My friends, I say to you here now today, Buffalo is on a mission this season. They win to kick off their NFL season.
Give me the Rams getting 2.5 at home, Super Bowl champs. I am fired up. Everyone seems to forget the Buffalo Bills still lost 6 games last year, but I love it. We're going to find out who is right and who is wrong I'm just glad football's back, baby. Getting ready for the Giants on Sunday.
Super Bowl hangover, man. It's a real thing, as Andy Makowitz would want, need. Until next time, nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.